Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're on the shared unceded territories of the Squamish Nation and the Lil'wat Nation, and we are honored to be able to play, recreate, those are the same things, and learn here. My name is Mandy Russo. I am the Executive Director for the Whistler Institute. The Whistler Institute is a nonprofit organization that brings educational programming and thought-provoking speaker series, such as this evening, to Whistler. We are able to do that through our funders, the McLean McCog Foundation, Bob and Sue Adams, the Lightburn Family Fund via the generous Mr. Steve Bailey, the Whistler Blackcomb Foundation, and the Resort Municipality of Whistler. Tonight's event is the fourth of 6 in this iteration of our speaker series, hosting experts from their fields to share their expertise and inspire greater understanding of our world. A bit of housekeeping, if you can make sure that your phones are on silent or vibrate. Restrooms, for those who are not familiar with the building, at the bottom of the stairs to the right. There is a photographer on site, and this event will be recorded for those who are not able to attend to make sure that we're making education available in perpetuity. Our speakers are about to have an honest and thought-provoking discussion about raising resilient and respectful athletes. Exploring the complexities of attachment, identity, development, and social dynamics in sport, Brian and Quinn will share with us their successes and challenges in navigating that landscape. We'll start a Q&A at 7 p.m., and our board vice chair, David Cronin, will be closing out the session. So about our speakers. Dr. Brian Storey is the inaugural Associate Vice President of Capilano University Squamish campus. He holds a PhD in Curriculum Theory and Implementation, a Master's in Educational Psychology, a Bachelor of Education, and Bachelor of Human Kinetics. He represented Canada in the 1996 Olympics in sailing and is a former President and Executive Director of Physical and Health Education Canada. Quinn Storey is a Master's of Science student in the Clinical Psychology program at the University of Victoria. He is a member of the Healthy Relationships Lab, where his research explores men's mental health, fatherhood, and underlying mechanisms in intimate partner violence. Quinn was an elite junior cyclist in road, track, and cyclocross. He switched to rowing in the first year of his undergrad at the University of British Columbia, where he won 3 national championships, served as team captain, and represented Canada at the 2023 Pan American Games. Please welcome this father-son duo to the stage.
Hey, folks.
We're just going to get set up. Mic's working.
Mic's working. Thank you so much for being here.
Wait,
Thank
pause.
You, Mandy.
Take a breath.
Oh, sorry.
Let's get to the show here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Mandy, for the introductions. I'm Quinn, and this is my dad, Brian, and we're 2/3 of the Storey family.
Yep.
We're super excited to be here to share a discussion and some theory around raising kids in competitive, high-performance sport environments. Before we dive into our content today, my dad's just going to walk us through a land acknowledgement.
Yeah, well, and even before we get there, Mandy did a nice job of getting that right off the top, and we know that's best practice, so thank you, Mandy. And thank you, Whistler Institute, for inviting us. We're really grateful. I think I just want to preface that we come to this presentation. It's not a typical presentation I've done as an academic. It's not something that I've ever done. Quinn and I have never done a presentation before. It was suggested to the Whistler Institute by some people who knew both our backgrounds as something, and I also have a global engagement background in post-secondary for 4 years. And so it was suggested, and we took it up. And so we come very humbly with whatever we offer tonight as 2 cisgendered, white, privileged males. And I say that because I think in sport, what we're going to talk about tonight, you can't look at the theater of sport that we're going to talk about without understanding the context of which the athletes you're growing up with and where they come from experience sport. So I preface that I just think it's important that we come with humility, and our experience is unique to us, and it's only an offering if it works for you as coaches or parents or anyone in your life outside of sport. So we are very grateful to be on the, yeah, thanks. We're going to tag team this.
Yeah.
We are very grateful to be here on the unceded and shared territories of the Lillooet Nation and the Squamish Nation. I do reside in Squamish now, full-time. I've been there part-time since 2015. And I think coming from a global job, what just always sits with me that I don't know that everyone really always talks about is how intercultural the Indigenous culture is right at our doorstep. Like being faced all the time to learn Indigenous language on signs, being faced to think about the land differently because of the narratives and stories we get around us, as we live in an intercultural moment because of indigenization. And so I'm very grateful for that experience. You don't have to be a global citizen and all over the world to experience what it means to feel in an intercultural moment. So that's a little bit of us, but we want to give you how we think about sport and have brought our thoughts about sport into our family system and into our coaching. I did coach in my graduate program that I ran. I taught teachers, coaches, and athletes. And so I did a lot of coaching, and I was 17 years the sports science chair in a sports science department. And so it took me a long time to figure out what sport meant to me personally, and then as a family, how I wanted to raise Quinn. And we come from very different backgrounds. Quinn grew up in a family that did sport. I grew up in a family that didn't do sport, and I did sport. Like I was that kid who got dropped off. First time my parents ever saw me sail, ever, was in the Olympics. So just imagine the kids in your life, if you've never seen them do your sport, and then that was the first time. So Quinn, I don't think could separate from me. So this is another family story. It's Simon Whitfield's family story. Who remembers 2008, Simon Whitfield's silver medal? Dramatic, amazing moment, right? But I don't know if you've heard this story before. It's quite famous, but this is Simon's voice for another presentation. I know I've worked with Simon. We did a coaching course together. But when I crossed the finish line in Beijing in 2008, in second, I had this wave of disappointment. And I look up, and my dad is hanging out of the grandstands saying, "Bloody beauty," he said. I told him, "Dad, I could have done better." And he replied, "No, you just learned the poetry of sport. 8 years ago, you beat a German who inspired another German to try harder, and that guy just beat you. It's poetry." That's the theater of sport right there. And if there's only one thing you take away tonight, Quinn and I talked about this, like if there was one thing we would want you to take away, it's that the outcomes don't matter. Like it doesn't matter whether Simon was silver or gold, right? To Simon it mattered. In that moment, in that stage of his life, what he thought was the most important thing was silver. But his dad, at a different stage of life, reflecting on all the things Simon had learned and what the theater of sport is in a contained environment and the drama of sport, knew the difference. He had the wisdom and experience. And that mentor relationship to bring perspective to the theater of sport that becomes all-consuming for our athletes who are high performance is the job of the parent and the coach, in my humble opinion. It's not to get more performance out of the athletes. The athletes are mostly at a high performance level already amped enough. And so this moment is really special because it captures pretty much most of what we want to leave you with tonight. So the way we'll roll is Quinn and I will roll through some slides. We'll lead different slides, ask each other some questions. After we do talk a little bit more about who we are, we want to define healthy high performance for you from our perspective. We want to talk about a few models of development so that if you are working with athletes in a coaching, maybe there's some pebbles here you can go and explore more to make a path. And then we'll do the improv, which is what we call the Q&A. If you didn't get this is the theater. You know, I'm
really going with it.
We thought we'd get a little creative. So yeah, there you go. So this is Quinn. That was Quinn when he was cute. So we talked a little bit about him. I think some things that aren't in the...
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Oh,
No worries.
perfect timing. Perfect timing. My dad's been talking so much. You need a drink?
Need a little break. Yeah, I'm thirsty.
All right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Tell them about me.
Have a drink, buddy. So, yeah, don't strain yourself. So the next thing, what I want to point out with Quinn is the idea that he trusted me as a parent. It was, you couldn't have a kid who was more trusting. So Quinn's first arm break was riding his bike with me when I was coaching him, right? So Quinn's first road rash that was substantial enough to be hospitalized was in a race I was running to raise money for his bike club, right? Like this idea that kids unconditionally trust coaches and parents without consent, right? Like kids don't give consent to be dragged into the forest, to be riding around behind their dad because their dad has a vision of him being a great mountain biker. And he took it all like with this like, yeah, it's all okay, it's kind of stride. So that was amazing. I just want to share that piece, like thank you. I don't, in front of all the witnesses, don't say I never thanked you. Yeah. And then the next thing is, I think since he started undergraduate is this attention to male mental health. So Quinn, it's not in the introduction, but what I really enjoy about watching Quinn is since his first year in undergrad, he has been working with suicide prevention in males, for another day, another story in our life. That's an important narrative. And had volunteers at Heads Up Guys and written research papers for them. And they do Instagram and social media to work with suicide prevention for kind of the stoic male crowd who doesn't usually seek out help. And I think the latest thing you told me, like this, when you came yesterday, was this work you're doing with male athletes now at UVic. So in mental health realm. So I think that attention to mental health is a thread that we've always kept in our life. Did I miss anything you want to share?
That's it. That's me, I think.
That's you. Yeah. It's weird, eh? People talking about you.
I know, it is a little strange. Well, this is my dad. I get to give it back to him now. Our sports journey and adventures started with my U6 and U8 soccer teams, which he coached, of course. He was there before the Olympics. He was there. He coached our teams, and in the 3 years I was on those teams, he led us to a single victory, I think.
Yeah, I think the other team didn't show up.
They didn't show up. I think half of our team
or
was
maybe
on the
we
other team.
gave half our team to
I think so, that's what happened. But that's where it started. Needless to say, soccer didn't work out, but he's been a huge piece in all of my sporting career and my academic career, a huge motivator for me working through my time in cycling and then transitioning into rowing. Although he did give me some flack, he used to say that rowing was for people who were too dumb to sail.
I didn't say dumb. We don't use the word, we try to watch our language. I said not smart enough.
Not smart enough to sail, and I gave it back to him. I said sailing was for people who were too weak to row. So it worked out well.
So it turns out the UBC rowing coach used to sail with me and then left sailing to row.
Yeah.
So,
we used to talk a lot of smack on the sailors, but it worked out for him. He's got a huge background in sports science, education, president of PhD Canada, and we're super excited to share, sort of our family approach and the way I was raised in sport as a process and really as a philosophy.
Or I thought I was raising you.
Yeah, we did our best. Yes. So today we're going to talk about healthy high performance through sport. And when thinking about how to put together this presentation, we wanted to put together a definition of what healthy high performance looks like. So we thought about a lot of the readings we've done and a lot of the theories that we both had drawn on in our own research and studies in psychology. And we put together this definition. And I'll ask you, Dad, what does this definition mean to you?
Yeah, and this is not a definition you'll find on the internet. It was, we looked across contexts of business, leadership, sport, and a general search on what do people define high performance as. And for me, it's super important that high performance is not outcome based. And I keep saying that, like, it doesn't matter if it's the medal, it doesn't matter if you're first or second, it doesn't matter if you win the soccer game. That's not high performance. High performance is a combination of resilience, repeatability, deliberate practice, and doing that across multiple contexts. And your context can be like they can be really crappy non-sport contexts. So a high performance person in a really bad context can be doing things like saving other people, right? They could be a first responder. These traits of resilience and repeatability and the things we're supposed to be learning through sport deliberately, through deliberate practice, should be transferable and visible across other places. So we will not talk about how to get the best sport performance today. We'll talk about how to get the best levels of resilience. And I think it's important to say how do we define resilience. I don't think young people always can get this, but resilience is earned, and it's the idea that you are okay when you're not okay. And it's when things happen in your life or things happen in your training. It could be a broken arm. It could be a gastrointestinal event when a moment when you've traveled across the world and you're at your event. Resilience is when an athlete, in this case we'll talk about sport, knows they're okay even though the conditions are terrible. Their identity doesn't get crushed. They know they're going to get up tomorrow, and they know that things will get better and they'll do it again. Right? So what's the opposite of that? And just think about that. Well, we know people who fall apart when something small goes wrong in their planning or training, because we train people to be super focused and follow their list and preparation. Well, maybe we should actually be thinking about training them the opposite way. So in preparation for the Olympics, my coach made us get out of the boat, broke something in the boat, made us train, and then we had to fix it while we were racing, but we didn't know what it was, right? And we didn't really have a coach. We had a friend who we helped. We told him to do that, right? Because most things, the difference in sailing between the winner and the loser was always what went wrong less. There was no such thing as perfect in sailing. It doesn't exist. So that's something that we want to bring to the table. The second is well-being, holistic, mental health, emotional health, social health, and physical health. And then across dynamic environments is self-explanatory.
That gastrointestinal problems when traveling abroad, it was a very specific example. Did that happen to someone that you know by chance?
A few times.
Few times.
The time you threw up at the airport before we got on the plane.
Yeah, that did, yeah. A couple of those.
Yeah. That was pre-COVID, when it was okay to get on a plane, like with a barf bag.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, oh no, we're going to the event anyway.
We're all good. Yeah.
We're all good. It's going to work out.
In
It's
my
the
purse.
nationals.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Now, through high performance sport, there's a lot of really healthy and unhealthy outcomes that can come about through engaging in early competitive environments from a young age. And the way that we lean really depends on how we interact with the competitive environments that we're in. So the skills and the resilience and the physiological determinants of health that we develop through sport can stick with us for a lifetime, but so can those negative outcomes that might develop. So injuries, difficulties emotionally, with emotional regulation, mental health challenges that arise from sport. And I'll ask you again, what are some ways that youth can learn?
Learn how to avoid these things?
Yeah.
Well, can I reframe that?
Yeah.
Can I say, like, what are the ways that coaches and youth can avoid some of this?
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, youth can't avoid it alone.
Yeah.
So when let's talk about body dysmorphia. So when I was 24, I had to sail in the Olympics in a boat that my body had outgrown. So I was in a 470, and the optimal weight was 275 pounds between me and my skipper. My skipper was 6 feet tall, and I was 5'11". We were too big, so I starved myself for 4 years. In that time, I counted my success as how skinny I was. So I really literally lived on a scale. I got very used to it. I got everything. Now, I couldn't see that would impact me for the rest of my life at the time, because I was so enmeshed in wanting to be the best sailor in the world that no one could have told me that I should not do that. So there is a role here for the parents and the coaches to be the voice of reason in what is healthy for an athlete and what's okay. And in my case, it turns out the amount of starvation that I put myself through was reasonable. I know that sounds crazy, right? But no one said high performance sport is healthy in and of itself in that theater. Like Simon Whitfield to this day, if you look at Simon in that race, I don't think that he wants to go into old age with that level of body fat and muscle, right? He knows that he would be sick. the first time he gets sick, he's going to be in trouble. So after the athletic phase, you have to put on more muscle and weight. It was the responsibility of the coaches, which I didn't have any. We were self-coached. And the parents, which weren't around in my case, to make sure that they were checking on me that I was eating enough. And that didn't happen. So I think what's interesting to me is that the athletes can't do this alone when they're in dysfunctional or unhealthy situations. It is the responsibility of the people who are the puppeteers of the theater, the parents who also get the social capital, the coaches who sometimes endorse behaviors that shouldn't be, or athletes too quickly back on the field. That is the requirement of setting up a healthy environment for athletes. And we have a lot of systems in sport that do check on coaches and coaches training.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
What would you have liked to hear when you were in that stage? You said you didn't have a coach and there's people there to check on you. What would you have liked to hear? What would you have liked to change about your experience of cutting weight during that time that would have made it easier for you to transition into a healthier body image as you grew older?
You're here too. So
I am here too.
So what did you, because you've had your own relationship with gaining size.
It's true, yeah.
If you want to talk about it.
We can.
And what has helped you? What have you heard from coaches or me or others that have helped you? Because you're me, you're me.
It's
man.
true. It's difficult. I transitioned from cycling to rowing, and in a year I had to put on. I was underweight for rowing, and I had to put on 50 pounds, I think, in a year and a half. You were
6'5" and you weighed 165 pounds.
For cycling. That's me when I was biking.
Yeah, that's the end of his cycling career after a bad crash.
So there's a huge, similar to you, I was living on the scale, especially during COVID, it really kind of consumed my life and showed up in my relationships, in my ability to do things like go surfing as a family. I couldn't go surfing without eating in between.
It was crazy.
It was crazy, yeah.
It was highly dysfunctional.
It was highly dysfunctional. And I think for me, it became so enmeshed in my value as a person. It was really difficult. Like my performance in the boat during that time, this was before I had kind of grown out of an image of sport as a process and into sport as sport as an outcome. And I was so enmeshed in this idea that my performance was related to my value as a human being, and that was related to my size and my physique.
So what did you hear from people around you that kept it tempered enough?
Yeah, I think hearing just external perspectives that it was going to be okay, in the grand scheme of things. Reality checks from coaches and parents really helped. But they're difficult patterns to avoid. I don't know, and it's tough as growing out of it. Yeah. All right.
Well, I know that his mom and I constantly reminded him, like, dude, you're okay. Like you're like, everything about what you're doing is okay, and you're loved regardless of your rowing result.
Yeah.
So did you hear that?
I did. Yeah. And that does help. And we'll talk about that as well.
That comes up in a bit later when we get to the theories of why you can come out of this hopefully healthy.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We're not doing counseling. So it's just so we're clear, we've already done our counseling. So everything you're hearing is vetted. Yeah.
So it's good.
You had to become a clinical psychologist. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. So there's some more leadership. Like I think, when we looked at the speaker series and the nature of the takeaways of putting sport in the global speaker series and the types of audience that we'd have, there are a lot of people who come out of sport and do really well in leadership, and there's a lot of dysfunction that comes out of sport. And I think the question that's really interesting for us is what differentiates the same experience over and over and over again, and some people becoming healthy athletes and some people becoming dysfunctionally self-destructive or just never developing the skills that were really there on offer in that theater. And it really comes down to reflection. Does the sport experience, does the coach and the parent support metacognition development of the athlete? Okay, that's a big educational term for those of you who aren't used to it. Thinking about their thinking. Does the coach and the parent ask the kinds of questions around the experience, not the outcome questions, but the questions around the experience that bring out the athlete looking at themselves and their behavior.
Yeah.
Do you want to do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think a really good example of this is you know, like the car after the hockey game example. You know, you've just had a really bad game and your kid lost. Maybe they played worse than they usually do, and you're in the car, and there's two outcomes. There's one outcome where you drive home, it's really quiet, and there's sort of a sense of disappointment in the car, and no one's happy. And the other outcome is things move on, and you're excited that you got to go out and play the game, and everyone's going to go home and be okay. And the way that we interact with sport as a family system really dictates children's reaction to adverse consequences. So when we think about things like blame shifting right at the top of that list there, in scenarios where children feel that their value or the love that they receive from parents is dictated by their performance in sport, it's really quite adaptive to engage in protective behaviors like blame shifting, to try and protect themselves from this idea of loss or of a lack of success. And one of the things that we can do as a family is really work on our reactions, not only to moments of exultation and glory through sport, but also really difficult moments, and how we're interacting with children in those moments, making sure that they feel loved and have the time to explore the experience of loss, explore the emotions, and then also reflect on their thoughts around it. And I think there's some really good moments for reflection, in your life through sport. Do you have any that you want to talk about, share? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I was actually, I just want to go back. I have a colleague here, Caroline Depati, and we had, she's the Dean of Global and Community Studies, and they're responsible for kinesiology. So Caroline's in the audience. And yesterday we talked about this hockey example.
Oh, yeah.
And parents. So I just want to acknowledge, that's really funny that you brought that up.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I want to stay with reflection just for a second, Quinn, if that's okay. The timing of feedback and reflection matters. And I think a lot of the feedback that coaches and parents get is they think it needs to be immediate. What needs to be immediate is safety and security. The feedback that athletes need right after an event is that everything's okay. What they don't need is critique or debrief. Most athletes generally in a sport that isn't high speed and high performance timed sports like alpine skiing or maybe downhill mountain biking where you need video to reflect, most sports athletes already know what they did wrong. All they need to do is feel secure. And then once they're secure, they will be able to answer their own questions. And once they're secure and calm and the timing's right, they'll generally be able to say, take an example of a hockey shift where an athlete goes on the ice, a goal is scored, and then right after that, they know it's their fault. They get in a fight. So they get flooded because they make a mistake. They get emotionally flooded because they make a mistake on defense. Then they get in a fight, or they get in a brawl. Then they get a penalty. And this is like a 14-year-old, let's do males, because we're males, and sorry, it could be any sport. But that experience has in it shame, guilt, anger, possibly like true rage, like we're getting past conscious anger into red state, and there's no feedback that any human that I know can take when they're flooded with emotions, right? And when they come off the ice, they carry those things with them. And so the question is, does that athlete need to know to talk about defense, the mistake they made on defense? Not at all. They know the mistake they made on defense. They don't need the debrief on the defensive mistake. But what happens in sport? Everyone wants to talk about the defensive mistake, right? And this is why we have so many unhealthy athletes who leave sport early, because their identity is tied to the mistakes through the process of always celebrating victory and talking negatively about the mistakes. And so it becomes a cycle of, my identity is everything's good when I win, and there's silence or there's negativity when we have to celebrate the process of being there, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I know you wanted an example, but
yeah.
For us, this is a really important takeaway that when we talk about the outcome not being important, it includes how the feedback happens. Sorry, was there anything else on this one?
No, it's perfect.
You wanted to get to? Okay. All right. So Yeah, so we're not into, well, maybe there's one more thing I want to say about reflection. That's quite important. The example I just gave, if you're a coach or a parent, maybe also think about this. You can use your fingers. There's two things in reflection that happen. There's task reflection and emotional reflection. And so in the example I just gave with the hockey scenario, the task reflection is the process of getting to a state of the athlete just being able to recognize, this is the mistake I made with the puck, where my position was, what I did with my stick. That's task competency. What happens is this mixing of task and emotion, and emotional reflection is a completely different process. Emotional reflection is a process of naming emotions, teaching through sport emotional language. Like if you're a Brene Brown fan, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, like literally learning Atlas of the Heart and teaching your children after sport events the language of Atlas of the Heart is probably the best thing you can do to get a healthy high performance athlete, in my opinion. The conversation around what you feel in a sport arena is probably the fastest way to emotional intelligence that anyone would get, but no coaching theory course really wants to go there, right? But that to me is it. So what happens in emotional reflection is you go through a process of revisiting the loop of what happened. Oh, that person did this, blame shifting. I did this. Oh, anger comes back, and we get flooded again and again in this cycle of revisiting a conversation or something that happened on the ice. And to break that cycle, we have to name what we did, give it an emotional name, and then we have to take responsibility. And the responsibility piece is sometimes apologizing. It's sometimes saying that actually maybe that wasn't my fault, but getting it validated by someone else, like the coach or the adult can validate, actually this time it wasn't you, you're okay to let this go. And other times it's actually the athlete going and saying, you need to go say sorry to that person. And then like that'll close the loop. So the loop doesn't get in the car and the loop doesn't lay in bed with them. And then the loop doesn't come to the next game and then become something that makes them want to quit the sport, because no one likes to live in constant anxiety about shame and guilt and things like that. So separating task and emotional reflection is how this table starts to break down in the action phases of the coaching parenting relationship. Okay, 3 development models.
Yeah.
Quinn's going to talk about Erikson's stage theory. He's the clinical psychologist, so good on him. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sport Canada's long-term athlete development plan, and we'll share some educational, if you notice, 3 of my degrees are in educational theory and practice. And I was a K-12 teacher, and I've taught in post-secondary and done a few things in my life. So we'll talk about educational insights. But the LTAD, how many of you have worked with or are familiar with the long-term athlete development model in sport? Okay, so, and keep your hands up if you're a coach here. Be nice to know. Yeah, so there's a few coaches here or work in high performance. Awesome. So the LTAD is helpful for organizing programs and systems, and it's often used as a way to filter students in and out of sport into different levels where we give more and more resources. It's fundamentally flawed for developing healthy athletes. Okay? And I taught a graduate program in coaching, and I told coaches this too. Why is it fundamentally flawed? What did we open the slideshow with? The most important thing is not outcome. So if process is what matters, and all the things you do to be successful are done before you walk in the arena, all the preparation Quinn and I did tonight was done before we sat on this stage. If the slideshow doesn't work, we can't control it. Like, we did our work. We'll be proud no matter what happens. If the athlete's done all the work before the outcome, then the whole model here, and if we raise kids that way and we celebrate them before the result, knowing that over-celebrating results leads to enmeshment of identity into a results-based positive feedback cycle, this model stages up athletes to the point where the penultimate stage is training to win. It's not training to be a high-performance person, right? And training to win raises the stakes. All the coaches who use this model without having more educational theory or robust background think this pyramid structure where you train and train and train to win what happens is often elite sports get into narrower and narrower and narrower, and you get more and more and more identity enmeshment. When in fact, secure attachment and identity breadth and less attachment to the result leads generally to more freeing space for the athlete to grow into their sport, right? So I just share that. We're not going to go deeper. We don't have time tonight because it's important for the adults in the room, and I just use that phrase for when we're raising kids, to be critical of the models that we're fed and what the philosophy is telling you and even the names of the stages. Because you can have high performance and you can win races without being totally enmeshed and feeling like if you don't win, you're going to fall apart.
Yeah. And I'll share a story that I love from our family growing up that you taught me. And I remember very early on when I started to compete a bit more seriously, you tell me this story about you and Paul, your sailing partner, before your Olympic trials.
Yeah.
And you two, in the night before your Olympic trials, celebrating the years and hours of work that had gone into this moment before you'd even started the race. And that's something that we did actively through my childhood that I really appreciated, because there can be so much pressure on a moment or a day to perform or a single race, and actively engaging in the process of remembering why you're engaging in the process, what matters with that process-oriented focus, was something that I really appreciated. And I think you guys, did you go to the bar before your Olympic trials? Is that right?
Sailors, eh?
Sailors, I know.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because I forgot about that. So Paul and I, we went to the 1992 Olympic trials, and it was in Los Angeles, and we finished last, dead last. They actually started a race before we could get from the finish line to the start line. Like, it was insulting. And so that was our first campaign, and most sailing campaigns take 8 years. It's a very highly technical sport, and it takes a long time. And Europeans don't, like, we don't have the European culture where there's races every weekend. Like, there's no really good 470 sailing culture here. So we went heavy in on this campaign, and we lived together in a van for 6 months at a time. Lived in parking lots. We had no karting money at the time because karting didn't really exist the way it exists now. And he became a doctor, went to med school, and I didn't know what I was doing at that time in my life. I ended up becoming a teacher after that. But I did study human kinetics, and I really liked sports psychology at the time as a student. And I understood this process versus product very early in my own sport career. And we got in the habit, Paul and I got in the habit of always celebrating, literally celebrating before the event, because we never knew what would happen in the event. And so the day before the Olympic trials, we were sitting at the Royal Van parking lot. It's an 11-day event. And we were sitting in the van. Someone had protested our boat, so we weren't sure if our boat was going to actually make it into the Olympics trials. We might have no boat after 4 years of training. It's in the hands of a jury. And we looked at each other and like, it's all been worth it. Let's go play pool. And so we went and played pool, calmed ourselves down, did the exact same routine we'd always done, because you just don't know what the outcome's going to be. And why would we let our entire self-worth rest on how good another athlete was that day? I have no control how well someone else shows up to their day. But if I show up my best and I've done all my work, I can celebrate that, right? So that's
yeah. That was a real gift you gave to me as well. Whenever I was traveling with you as a youth athlete, just when I remember the car, we'd always stop and get a treat on our way to the race to celebrate quite often. And then that's something I brought with me traveling abroad to race. And whenever I'd race in university, and then when I was racing for Canada on the airplane, doing something to celebrate before I even arrived in the spot I was going. And that was a real gift and made a huge difference for me as well this morning career.
Yeah. Oh, here we are. So Erickson.
Here we are. Yeah.
Give us some clinical.
For sure. So there's a lot of ways to think about and conceptualize development, especially healthy development. And one of our favorites is Erickson's stage model. So it's quite an old model. It received some criticism for being quite prescriptive with ages, but what has stuck is this idea that across the lifespan, so from the time we're born until the time that we pass away, we're faced with a number of stages. Erickson said 8 stages. And in these stages, we're posed a challenge. So for example, from around age 6 to age 12, kids start going to school, and they have to face this challenge of industry versus inferiority. So they have to develop a sense of industry as they learn things like math and spend days away from their parents for the first time. And if they're able to overcome that challenge on their own, they develop a really strong sense of autonomy and sense of competence. And if they don't, there's feelings of inferiority and feelings of incompetence that can last for some time and need to be fixed later on. And sport is really an amphitheater for a lot of these challenges. You know, you can think of, down the list here, we picked 4 that we feel really apply to the theater of sport. And you can think of, for any of you who have little mountain bikers ripping around, like your first time going on rides without your parents and these sorts of things, right? Like super scary, but also really great ways to face the challenge of building industry, a sense of industry. And likewise, for teenagers, and this was a big struggle for me as well in multiple sports, a large challenge that they're faced is defining themselves and figuring out who they are. And when we're in competitive sport from a young age, a large part of who we become can get wrapped up in our sport identity. So this is a big piece to consider when we have kids going through this identity versus confusion stage. Same thing with intimacy and isolation, working through intimate relationships with teammates, intimate relationships with coaches, and finally, as we grow up and we've had all these experiences and challenges that we've faced, imparting this knowledge into these little sort of versions of ourselves through generativity and the need to support the next generation. And the question that a lot of people face is what can we do to support children when they're faced with these challenges? You know, I see my kid who's really struggling to gain that sense of industry, or I see my kid who's really struggling to figure out who they are through sport and figure it out. And the answer is, you can't help. You can't help directly. One of the big things that Erickson talks about is the need to overcome these challenges on your own. But what parents can do is provide really, really safe spaces for kids to approach these challenges and then regress from them if they're, you know, they've met their match. So in cases where maybe, you know, I remember starting to ride for my first time and I was so afraid of forests. I was so afraid of cougars.
Oh,
like,
really?
oh my goodness, it was awful.
I did not know that.
I remember
That's awesome.
I would always kind of rip around on my own a little bit, and we'd get separated when we were on rides, and I'd try and maybe do my own little trail, and I'd start to get a little nervous and get a little freaked out, and I'd try and find you, and having that safe space to go back to when it turns out that I wasn't ready to, you know, be on my own was a huge part of my ability to try again, and then try again and fail, and try again and fail. And that's a real gift that parents can give to children, especially in sport, as they're working through these stages themselves. So I'll ask you, what was it like watching me go through these challenges as a youth?
Well, that's the weird thing, right?
Yeah.
So because I did a fair bit of maybe over-education in my life, I don't know what's normal for education, but I haven't found my trajectory normal. I knew this stuff when I was raising Quinn, and so my friend describes it very best, and she says, I'm like a sumo mom. I'm always kind of ready to catch my teenagers. Like I just hang around the edges, ready to wrestle. What's next? And I think that's the key. Like the stage can happen. There's no predictability. Like our support systems are designed by ages. You know, here's the break between recreation, then it becomes high performance at this age, and then it becomes the next thing at this age, and all of a sudden you're training to win by this age, and it's very prescriptive with ages. Well, the truth is you went through, like you were doing awesome in cycling. I thought you were the happiest kid in the world. And then like your identity was cyclist. You were racing with elites men. You were racing the semi-pro race at U17, and I was like, this is crazy. This kid's gonna be like off the chart cyclist, and my ego was super full, and I was getting all this like great vibes because my kid's an amazing athlete. I get all the, you know, I don't know what you call it, but it's like vicarious joy of watching him develop. And then all of a sudden he had like a crash, a head-on collision on a bike route, of all things, that crash that you saw there. Then he ripped all his skin off in this road race. And then it was impossible to get back to where you were. And you had this huge identity crisis. You went on your volleyball team at high school. You'd never played volleyball.
Yeah.
And then you searched there for a while, and that team went to the provincials, and you sat on the bench, and it was one of your best experiences ever, I remember.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Love the bench.
Like you love the bench. Like it was awesome watching. He was so happy, and I thought, well, I thought he was happy because he was such a good cyclist.
Yeah.
And then here he was on a bench, on a volleyball team, loving it. And then you took up rowing,
Yeah.
which was terribly hard because you were so good at being good at something. And then the RBC training ground did the talent ID for rowing, and you were really struggling.
I sucked. I was really bad.
The UBC coach came and watched him, and he capsized.
I did. First, the UBC coach came out to watch me row for a recruitment row, and he had me do a skills drill, and I flipped into the water at Burnaby Lake, and I got pink eye. And that's a true story.
It was terrible.
It was terrible.
It was
yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
It was watching. It was just painful, and you were struggling. So, like, this was a 18-month-long transition in this identity. What is his, like? I could see him struggling. Like, what's his identity? What's it going to be? And then you did go to UBC, and then all of a sudden, in about a year at UBC, you were the happiest I'd ever seen you, and you had nothing to do with me.
That was probably it.
But that's exactly what Erickson says. That's exactly what the stage theory says. You had to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
I put you in cycling.
Yeah.
All of the rewards you got were me praising all the efforts you did. Everything about it that was amazing. Even when we celebrated before, it was still like me praising you.
Yeah.
Like, who doesn't want the praise of their parents?
Yeah.
Right? I would have loved if my parents came and watched me sail.
Yeah.
Right? That would have been awesome.
That really highlights for me what I take away from Erickson's model, which is that it's a continuous process. And like for me, like you said, I had to recreate my identity multiple times. I was a cyclist, and that's who I was in high school. Like, that's how I defined myself. And then I was almost a volleyball player for a little bit.
Oh, you were.
And then and then I was a rower.
You used your head sometimes.
I did use my head sometimes. It worked once, and then we tried our best. But it just goes to show that when we're developing these skills, it's not like you develop your sense of industry and you have it for the rest of your life. What you're developing is a skill set that allows you to face the challenge every time it comes up again and again in your life. You retire and you're faced with a huge identity crisis all over again. But what you've developed is the skills that you need to go through that change and to go through that process.
Could you call that resiliency?
You could absolutely call it resiliency.
Could a high performer maybe?
I absolutely agree. And those are definitely skills that can be developed through sport if they're approached in safe ways, where children get the opportunity to reflect and to be okay in failure and to try again. And that's how we approach Erickson's stage theory.
Yeah, and there's more. I mean, we could talk about Simon's dad, right? Yeah. Being a mentor to Simon, and that last stage, generativity, like how coaches come into coaching and then bring this healthy, high performance knowledge and the ability to help athletes reflect and learn language about their emotions. That's what I'm getting at. That's what I got out of it, right? Yeah. So it goes on. You could be a Jungian philosopher and then maybe apply Jungian theories to athletics in the same way. This one just particularly works, I think, it's really good in the middle stages if you want to look more into it. A couple of educational theories that are really, I think, takeaways we want to leave you with. I literally struggled academically for, I think, almost a decade to reconcile sport-based physical education, sport, and all the stuff we say we develop in physical education. There was an irreconcilable way that people talked about competition and exclusion, and all these great traits about harmony and resilience and stuff that we're doing. There were winners and losers in zero-sum sports, in team sports and invasion games. And finally, my head, it was right in front of me, and I just had to open up to it. It was the idea that we can change the narrative. We can change the narrative for athletes, and we can talk about the theater of sport as a consensual, mutual activity. It's a collaboration. So every time there's a competition in a sport arena, it is a consent to test yourself against a peer, right? The two people who enter that space are saying, I consent to this engagement so that we can both test ourselves. And that's something that you grew up with that. What did that fit? Was that weird? Well, when I would try to explain it to Quinn, I could see his face go over. I'm like, dude, no, like, they're there. Like, this is a celebration of all the work you've all done to be in that space together. Yeah. I think you must have thought it was strange.
It was a little strange, and it was really hard to wrap my mind around. Like, I think wanting to win is so innate, and it takes really active practice and work to move away from that. It's not natural for anyone.
You can still want to win.
You can still want to win, but that need to win and focusing on that as the exclusive determinant of a successful sporting endeavor is so natural. And I love your recent take on this, actually moving into master sports, which is difficult. But your idea that you've always told me, which is you won because I was there, which I love. And can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not that complicated. So now that I'm a master's athlete and I love the theater of sport and I just love events, I love the energy it brings. Sometimes you're like in the middle of a pack of a bike race, suffering like a dog, and then you just remind yourself, it's like, oh yeah, this bike race is better because I'm here. Right? There's more numbers.
Yeah.
Like there's more people. Like the person who's ahead of me is happy because they're ahead of me. Right? Like it's so true. Every one of us is looking one rider back going, oh, I'm gonna beat that person. I'm part of that. That's awesome. That's consent to go out and have a good time. Yeah, we're gonna get some results and measure each other, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
Social constructivism is really straightforward. Let's kind of quickly just talk about that. The idea that your athletes never learn alone. They'll always learn in groups. And even the language we use is embedded in a history of group-based, like language is imbued with meaning because it's given meaning by culture. So the language you pick is a social constructivist act. But in sport specifically, who you surround yourself with matters. And the role of the coaches and mentors in this space is to make sure that group is healthy. And meaning healthy language use, healthy support of each other, collaboration. And the very greatest Canadian athletic stories, in my opinion, including the 470 story when we went to the Olympics, and no other 470 qualified the class in the world for 12 years after we went, is based on these sort of crazy Canuck collaborations because we don't have enough people. But we just happen to have 5 470s in Vancouver at one time who agreed to a 4-year, basically it was almost a written agreement where we would share every piece of knowledge and intensely train against each other. So we made a European village style and we trained until the Olympic trials. The deal was we would train together until the Olympic trials. So about 2 months before the Olympic trials, we stopped. No other boat made it to the Olympics, could get to the bar, the international bar, for 12 years after that in Canada. And the one, when they did, because they didn't collaborate, they were last at the Olympics. And so the experience of who you surround yourself with will dictate your success.
I think, even more than sporting success, especially for youth, the people that you surround yourself with during these real transitional and developmental periods dictate who you become as a person. Like in my time at UBC, I entered as a very young, I would still consider myself to be a boy, mentally quite young, quite nervous, focused on outcome, really insecure. And the people that I surrounded myself, I was able to take pieces that I really liked and hold on to them, and take pieces that I really didn't like and put them away. But who I am today is very, very much a result of the sporting environment I was in at UBC on that team. And if I was at a different team, it would have been different. And that's something that takes active consideration when choosing, what kinds of environments, sporting environments kids are engaging in, who they're engaging with. Are coaches having these narratives that support full and broad development, or are they too focused on sport outcomes from too young of an age?
The UBC laundry story is one of my favorites. There were 2 schools Quinn was looking at. One, the athletes did all the laundry, or the program did all the laundry. And another, so that's a very attractive thing, right? I want to go to the US American school and get the varsity athlete experience.
I was 16, to keep in mind. Laundry was a big deal for
17.
me. Yeah.
And then we went to the UBC coach has the winningest program in history in the country. And there's reasons for that. I know him quite well. And we were trying to figure out hey, which program should Quinn go to? And so I took Quinn over.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Well,
this?
yeah, and I asked him like a fool. We were talking about the erg room.
Hilarious. I've never laughed.
Yeah,
This is amazing.
And we're in the erg room, First of all, the aerobic room is a dungeon. Like there's rotten pipes everywhere, and it's just
It's totally Rocky
It's
Balboa.
totally rocky
Yeah.
and gritty. And I asked him, I was like, "Do you have laundry service?" And he looks at me and he goes, "Do your own damn laundry." And that was it. And that was
And it was great. I mean,
great,
that
yeah.
program wins every now and it's like the coach's philosophy is radical responsibility.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Show up, take responsibility for yourself, and support each other to become responsible. Not individualism, but collective responsibility for the success of the program. Yeah. Like, do your own laundry.
Yeah.
Grow. You're a person.
Yeah.
You're not a prince.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And growing up in that environment really did have a huge impact on who I am.
Yeah. So, anyways, we could talk all night. Self-determination theory is a good one for those of you who want to look up. This is probably for anyone in the room who wants to look at motivational theory, the most important motivational theory. Whether you're in HR, if you work in HR or you work in an organization, you want to know what makes people tick. SDT is widely known. There's 3 reasons people will be motivated to train, for example. One of them is their sense of autonomy. Like, do they have control over their own actions and body and what they do? The other is their sense of relatedness. Do they get a sense of joy and reciprocity with other people, connection, social? And then the third is a sense of competence. And so the program and the athletes you're working with, you can just use those 3 things to check in, like, why is my athlete motivated or not? And sometimes you can say, okay, there's no relatedness, like the athletes are not connecting with each other. There is no connection. And it goes back to that social constructivism. So if the relatedness is low, the program will struggle and the athlete will struggle. If the competence is always criticized and that people don't feel competent because it's always you could be better, not celebrating what you have and then where's next, like a growth mindset. And failure is treated as a learning opportunity, right? There's all sorts of great quotes around that, right? I'm not losing, I'm learning, all that cliche stuff. But there's reasons we say that stuff. And then the last one is that autonomy, right? So as students go through that stages of development and they want to differentiate, are athletes given enough responsibility? Quinn was in a program as a mature athlete the last few years where actually I would just say autonomy went down. And the coach didn't trust the athletes to be off program and then show up ready and stuff. And that was an amazing thing to watch. And actually, do you think that there was an autonomy component there?
Yeah, I think I had an opportunity to shift programs for my master's and continue training with under different leadership and seeing the impact that a lack of autonomy has on not only athletes' ability to perform consistently, but also their ability to interact in healthy ways with other athletes on a team. You know, when people lose autonomy, they search for power, which is what you lose in different ways, and it shows up.
You lose personal power,
you lose
so
personal power.
You look for it over other people.
And it really does have a large impact. And I think I love for self-determination theory this idea that you'll perform exactly how you think you'll perform at the end of the day. Like your beliefs about yourself and others' beliefs about you are huge.
I think you just jumped to self-fulfillment.
I did. That was supposed to be a smooth transition, but you pointed it out there.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
But for self-fulfilling prophecy, this one is a great story as well that I think we'd love to share.
How many times, so this one, this is a family story that goes a long way back. How many times were you the most improved skier at the Taiyi Ski Club?
2 years in a row, which is hard to do. You have to start really bad, is what it turns out.
Yeah.
But I did win most improved skier 2 years in a row. And at the time, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I was just getting really good at skiing. Turns out I wasn't. When I came into skiing, I had come into skiing quite late, and I'd been cycling, and I wasn't a good skier at the time. I was about 13, 14 when I started.
No, you're younger than that.
12? I was young.
You quit at 13, so like you
It's
didn't
all
start
a blur,
quitting.
really.
Yeah.
I was young. I was older than the other kids who had been skiing for longer, and the coaches, they kind of told us that, oh, maybe he's too old, like he might not, make it in the program. We're looking for more skilled athletes, and my parents told them. You can tell them what you told them.
So self-fulfilling prophecy is not related to the athletes. It's actually related to the parents and the coaches. So the Pygmalion coaching theory is really straightforward. Teachers and coaches, and it's super evidence-based. This is true, and just please imagine yourself doing this. When you expect someone to be something, you hear, for example, someone's good at math and you give them a math test, and then they don't score well enough. If you think they should be good, what do? You coach them more. You give them more feedback. If you think someone is not meant to be good and then they do bad on that math test, what happens is you feel validated. You're like, oh yeah, I knew they wouldn't do well. Do you give them more feedback? No, because you're validated. That's over, it's done. So self-fulfilling prophecy is not about the athlete, it's about the coaches and parents' expectations and how they share them with athletes, or how parents share them with coaches. And so I knew this theory. Again, I taught sports psychology when I was in sports science. So this was my lab. So I went to the coaches and I said, sorry, is there any Tai ski coaches here? No.
Thank goodness. Okay.
Okay. Is there anyone a ski coach here? Okay, if you know the Tai coaches at this time, don't tell them. I went to the Tai coaches and I'm like, this kid is like the best athlete in all his other sports. And I know we're starting late, and he trains with me a lot, and I work in sports science, so it's only a matter of time. That's what I told them. And the coaches were like, oh, that's so cool, tell me more, yeah, okay, yeah, no, that's great, yeah, I totally get it, right? And so for that year, Quinn went from zero, I would ski and I would volunteer as a parent. I would just watch the coaches over give Quinn feedback. Like completely too much attention to Quinn. I'm like, I'm not going to complain, right? Because I'm a parent. But that's what they did. It was like complete Pygmalion coaching theory 101. Because what happens is the coaches want to be validated that this athlete is going to get better. So when the athlete student does something wrong or does something they could improve, they jump in and give them more feedback. Because eventually they see the progression. So what happens? The awards come up and the coach is like, oh, Quinn's improved so much. We feel great about ourselves, right? So the next year comes, what do, Brian, if you're the dad? You go to the coaches and you're like, that was amazing. He's got so much more potential. You should see what he's doing on his bike. Like, it's amazing. Same thing happens, same next year.
Yep.
I think you're the only kid who ever has won 2 years in a row.
Back to back,
Back
probably.
to back, most improved skier.
I know.
I mean,
I wasn't even that good.
No, you weren't. You kind of were terrible.
I know.
Yeah. I've already talked about generative reflection. That's the splitting of reflection into two parts. Do you remember the two parts? Task-focused and emotionally focused. And they're slightly different and the timing can be different. So just learning to pay attention to that. So that's what generative critical reflection is when you don't just reflect for the sake of reflecting, you do it to generate a growth. What's the growth, right? So growth mindset. So we didn't want to leave, just in case any of you do know athletes that need some support, these slides will be circulated. And so there's tons of free counseling out there for athletes that are struggling. I took counseling when I retired from the Olympics. I was totally enmeshed with my sport. I think I used all my education to learn all the things in hindsight that I wish I had been parented and coached, whereas Quinn got that all the way through. So I actually needed counseling just to retire. And I think it's very common to be so enmeshed in your performance that the stages of transition, people need support. And I think in normalizing support is compared to what we had, I think it was the first pilot project ever for post-Olympic counseling was the year I went, 1996. And it was run actually by Dana Sinclair out at UBC, and her dad happened to be a UBC faculty, and she was a clinical psychologist, and they set up this program with the Canadian Olympic Committee. So, but now, so many.
Yeah. Stepping out of sport, even, one of the best things you can do to support, future mental health among children is talk to them about mental health, engage in conversations.
Normalize it.
Make normalized discussions around mental health, discussions around emotions, and checking in with kids, especially kids during particularly difficult transitions in youth when they're compounded with pressure to perform, or maybe they're going through a transition out of sport, for example, can be super important. And these are great resources that'll be on the slides, which will be circulated after.
I think, Mandy, we're going to circulate them. Perfect.
All right.
So this is it. We thought we would help you because we knew we couldn't cover, oh, there he is. That was your
in the lake.
UBC trial?
Yeah.
We thought we'd help. There was more that we would want to talk about, but we didn't know what you'd be interested in. So we threw a few topics up here that we are really comfortable talking about, but we're also open to any questions you have. So improv means audience participation. You tell us how to perform. We're in the theater, so we'll do our best. So yeah, we can move into Q&A. And if you don't have an idea or something captures you from this interest, these are things we're really happy to talk about as well. Yeah, so thanks for listening.
I saw that you're part of Escape Velocity and that you race track, and now you study suicide prevention. And did that affect you, and what, were you on the team then?
Jeremy.
Yeah. I was not on the team then, but
Jeremy
you
and I were close.
very close. Yeah, I'll let you. Well, it's.
Do you want to share why one of the impact factors? It's up to you. You don't have to.
Yeah, I think our family has been close to a number of deaths by suicide. Jeremy was one of them. Jeremy and my father were really close when I was growing up. And for those of you who don't know, Jeremy was a member of the cycling community and a big part of the Burnaby Velodrome when it was created. And he died by suicide. So being around the grief of individuals recovering and being really intimately close to individuals who knew people who died by suicide quite well was a big motivator for me to begin engaging in that work. So yes, yeah, it was for me.
I'll throw the theory in here. So Quinn also had another traumatic event in our family. We don't need to go into detail, but related to the topic. And his age you were 2009, so your age was very close to Jeremy's death. And if you go to Erickson's stage theory, it's right at the stage of black and white. And Erickson's stage theory is brilliant because it talks about things like how do children process divorce? How do children process a trauma like a death in a family? How do children process sport? So the stage of identity and role confusion is when you're in a black and white stage. I don't know if you want to hear your own psychoanalysis here, but there's a fairly strong identity construction moment where you have to reconcile what happened. And so that becomes strongly part of your identity. If it happened younger in Quinn's life, the people around, if it had happened younger, it can almost have no impact sometimes. And if it had happened older, his identity may have already been differentiated from the family. And so so those stages matter when these events happen. And this is the part about why we come with humility. We've lived through enough, right? Yeah, we're white cis males, but we've actually lived through enough to know that none of that matters. And what you are dealing with your athletes and family, they come with this stuff, right? So thank you for bringing up Jeremy. He's a lovely soul. You'll see in a second that I also lost my sailing partner, the person I went to the Olympics with 2 years ago, not to suicide, to a heart attack. But he was my best friend, and we raised each other's families and stuff. So this stuff's real, and part of, I think, why I'm pretty comfortable talking about Brene Brown. So, any other questions?
It's a very interesting talk, amazing talk. I'm confused because my impression, if I looked at the East German, the time of the Russians, and even the tennis, the amount of East German participation dominating tennis, which I know reasonably well, I always had the impression that people were heavily motivated and unbelievable motivation and the money and everything. It's quite different from my impression what you're saying. It's more the how you compete and develop. Does this support what went on? Would the Russians have been doing this? Would the East Germans been doing this?
Yeah, I'll start my answer with I think what your question is, but there's very different sports systems. So in North America, we have a problematic sports system, the way we develop physical literacy in our children. We give children choice before they should have choice. So children, again, back to stage theory, in the Eastern European system are not given choice in what sports they do until they are autonomously and have physical literacy in place. They do all sorts of sports. This is not, I'm not going to talk about China and Russia's early specialization. China and Russia's early specialization models aren't even possible here. Where they take children from families, they put them in camp. Like, that's not something we can do here. But what is fascinating from a physical literacy point of view and then a motivational theory point of view and Erikson's stage theory is Eastern Europeans to this day put their children in all sorts of sports and they're required to do it. So it's not a choice for the families until they have, physical literacy. They can do gliding, they can do jumping, they can do throwing, they can do all the physical literacies, endurance, all those things. Then once they hit the resistance stage where they're like, my identity, I need to pick my identity to be industrious, that's when they pick and specialize. And the difference is in North America, we ask children at like 6, oh, you don't like it, then let me put you in a new sport. It's like, well, then they don't learn how to run and kick a soccer ball. And then, so instead of saying, well, you signed up, we're going to do it, it's going to be fun until the end, and then we'll do another sport because we're going to teach them resilience, stay with something till it's over, and then do another sport and do another sport, and then check off all the physical literacy pieces. So make sure there's some gliding, make sure there's all those things. It's not exactly what you're asking. I'm not sure if I touched on it.
I just wanted you to comment on it.
Yeah, there's a whole body of physical literacy theory that backs up also the lifelong athlete story about being able to problem solve your life. For example, when you become a pregnant woman, your body changes. Do you have the knowledge, competency, and experience from the past to change your physical activity levels so you can stay active? Then when you're recovering, do you also know your body? Do you have experience? Like, your whole body, when you break your arm, when you're old, or your leg or your hip, do you have physical literacy? And it's all related to that childhood development phase of what happened in the sport or physical activity background. Our North American model is totally broken. I'm sorry, that's very strong language. Not broken everywhere. Some families augment it and figure it out. Some schools do it right. Generally speaking, the autonomy we give young children keeps them from developing proper physical literacy for lifelong engagement, even in the long-term athlete development model.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was intrigued at the mentioning of our enmeshment of our personal worth and value being part of, being celebrated for results and just celebrated for, being athletes along the way. And I'm wondering how that plays with the other theory where it happens much earlier in life, where the parent doesn't see the child as anything other than an athlete anyways, that has a blank canvas of many abilities that they deserve to explore.
Yeah, I wish your mom was here.
I know.
I really do.
I had very different parents growing up. Like, my dad was always really involved in my sport. And I would say, honestly, I had probably a subconscious belief that if I was not in sport for a long time, our relationship would be different. And we've worked through that, for sure. But that's something that I probably would have believed as a kid. And my mom did not care in the slightest whether or not I was in sport at all. Like, she would say, she loved seeing me be happy in sport, if that's what I was happy in. But all she cared about was that I was kind. No matter what I was doing, I was kind.
Those values.
And I was happy.
She cared about
core values.
She's a big part of this story of your success, for sure.
And I think this idea of over-specializing children, like we talked about, putting children in sport early so they can develop competencies, but forcing them into sport not from a perspective of this is what we do because we're being happy and healthy and developing sport literacy competencies, but this is what we do because you're going to be something. You're going to be a performance athlete and you're going to have these outcomes and this is what we're building towards. Those are two very different approaches. And when we put children in situations where they feel there's a need to perform, like there's a need to perform to feel validated, and that's how they're seen in the family, it can be quite difficult. And I think it's something that can happen in really sneaky ways. Like, it's not, there's very few parents would go around and actively sort of tell their children, like, hey, if you don't win this hockey game, backyard, like it's not something that would happen. But the way that we interact and even carry ourselves, children are so good at picking up on their parents' really subtle reactions to things. And really paying attention to that, and parents can have a huge difference on the way kids interact with sport for life, the way they interact with competition, and the way they develop as humans, really. Yeah.
But I want to talk about the blank slate. Like, could Quinn have been high performance music, or like it's high performance, or not even high performance, but could have been the music, could have been anything. Like the idea that it's the environment that am I getting right? That it's the environment of what they're in creates the story, or.
What about not high performance in anything and just like happy to just.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That not everyone wants or needs or desires. I actually believe that the parent's job is to follow the child's direction. But I don't believe that the child knows what's best for the child. And so like in our house, the rule was actually, there was no high performance when we were young. Like Quinn didn't do anything.
As evidenced by our soccer career.
Yeah, like he lost like we were, like it was all recreation. So the cycling, everything up until the skiing, yeah, he was racing, but it was like all like complete no, it was not about results. It was only after he started racing at around age 13, 14, that competition started to matter. And if a child doesn't have that internal desire to do more of that, then what matters is, do they have autonomy, relatedness, and competence somewhere in their life? Like every child needs the sense of self-determination to be motivated. Where they find that doesn't have to be in an environment that rewards high performance.
Coming back to Erickson's model,
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I just think it's colored from the very.
Yeah, that was what we were asked to talk about.
Yeah. Well, it's also like this
100%.
is.
We could do a
speaking of-
physical literacy. I could do a whole physical literacy presentation as well, which is nothing to do with high performance.
Yeah.
That was just this topic.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. As long as kids have an outlet to face the challenges that they need to face, whatever it may be, then there's huge capacity to develop into, well-rounded and successful people. Yeah.
Your comment actually feeds really well into my next question, which is around injury. So if your child does define themselves as an athlete and spend a lot of time, do you want me just to start from the beginning?
Yeah, maybe because I think they're recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did want you to talk about injury, especially if your child does define themselves as an athlete, spends a lot of time doing athletics. When they are injured, there's a huge dip in mental health and, what do I do with my time? How do I recover? What am I going to do? And so I'll sort of take a cue from point 5, how you deal with it, especially physically and mentally during your recovery time and getting back into it.
Yeah. I think periods of injury we know are super high risk periods for athletes, especially people who are high performance athletes and define themselves through those roles. What's lost in those moments is a sense of identity and also a sense of purpose sometimes, I find, for athletes. There's a lack of, like, what do I do? I was doing 2-a-days, 3-a-days every day, and now I'm sitting at home. And I think it's a really good opportunity to reflect on the pieces of yourself in sport that you like, and the pieces of yourself outside of sport that are also important to you. Because sport eventually ends, and in those moments, like, I've been very injured a number of times. I had some unfortunate crashes in cycling and periods of illness, and those were the periods where I felt I was really confronted with the fragility of who I was and how I defined myself. And that's what feels really scary for me in those moments. That's what caused me to have a lot of sort of mental health challenges during those periods of times and struggle with, finding motivation is what am I if not this? And now I'm seeing how fragile this piece is. So I think for parents, like, what I saw you do and what was really helpful for me was having conversations about, like, finding purpose in returning to sport, in the activities that are, engaging in physio can be really powerful. But even outside of the focus, like, because everything's focused on the return to sport. Even outside of that, focusing on feelings in those moments and how do you feel being injured, and what are the things that are coming up for you that are scary? You know, what is this showing about your self-concept that you're so, you know, disheartened by this experience? What components of it are because you feel the need to be physically active, and that is a really big part of who you are and who you're going to be for lifestyle, and what part of it is your need to be in competitive environments and have validation through that perspective. So really engaging in those active conversations during that time was something that was super helpful when I was very injured and concussed. And
I think it's that sumo parent stance. Is
Yeah.
You never know when it's going to happen, and so that piece is really important. And it reminds us as parents and coaches that kids need lives outside of sport. Like, they need friends outside of sport. They need to be friends with their school, and we need to not be putting all of the identity. I think if there's, like, that's the message, right? All your identity shouldn't be your athletic identity. That's the risk. That's why I needed counseling when I left.
And not just your athletic identity.
It's not
Yeah.
healthy. I mean, to your point, it's not healthy. That's the point. It's using the moments like that in the sumo to imbue the language of emotion, to imbue the language. Because when things are just kind of cruising along, you don't have the vulnerability to make the stage shift. It's actually the stage shifts happen during the vulnerable moments in the family. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's exactly when you kind of lean into the things that are meant to change, and that's when the changes happened. Quinn quit because of an injury, quit cycling because of an injury. There was a massive phase shift there in his identity, and that needed a lot of wraparound support at that moment. And it's inevitable, like, it is inevitable, right? All right, good questions.
Oh, one more, sorry. Yeah.
Carolyn. I know where you work, so be kind.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. I've learned a lot tonight. I find your point 3 there in your Act 3, reconciling privilege and equity in sport experience. We do live in the Sea to Sky corridor. We have people that are very privileged. You know, in the corridor, a lot of our kids do sport that require a lot of financial support that are and sponsorship and all this stuff around it. So I don't know if I have a question. I guess, yeah, I could have a question. And how do you address this privilege and these inequities, you know, with your children, or even embrace maybe supporting children that may not have access to this privilege and inequity in an area like here? I know it's a big question and a big issue, but
I don't think it. I think you can really look at what you can control in your sports environment. So if we're sticking with sport, for me, you know, I immediately just started volunteering as soon as I finished being an elite athlete because I wanted to give back. So I ended up running Escape Velocity for 8 years, and I was vice president for that before that for 7 years. I ran Physical Health Education Canada as a volunteer. So for me, it was volunteering was my way of giving back. For Quinn, we made him volunteer. We made the bike, so the Devo kids actually had to fundraise for other kids, and we had bursaries. So we made sure that children who didn't have access to bikes, we had a bike loaner program. We had a bursary program for families who couldn't pay the dues. And so we systematized support in the environments we had control over. I mean, the Sea to Sky is a very privileged place. So in my life, Quinn was exposed to that. And then as soon as he went to university, Quinn started volunteering in the Heads Up Guys suicide prevention program. So for me, that reconciliation was active. It was an action-based recognition of my privilege. And I think for Quinn, like speaking for you, but it was action-oriented. It's what we could control.
Yeah.
Does that resonate? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
I've been listening and reflecting a lot on watching our high-performance athletes deal with feeling the need to sort of sell themselves and through social media and sponsorship. How do you, through like emotional literacy lens, how do you recommend supporting our youth with that?
I think developing one of the things that I really benefited from in cycling was developing the skills that were required to engage in sponsorship, deals and like talk with sponsors and sell yourself a little bit in healthy ways. So I think it can be quite positive. I know where it gets difficult is through like excessive social media posting and feeling like a real need to brand yourself from a very young age, which is something that I felt and I see a lot of young athletes feeling, especially through social media. And I think that ties into our discussions of identity, right? Like putting out this public identity of yourself as an athlete, and especially when you're considering sponsors, like what do sponsors want? Performance. So what you're selling is this idea that I'm an athlete and I will perform, and this is who I am. And that is quite risky.
It's a double down.
It's a double down on that perspective. And I remember that feeling being in a bike club, like the only way you can do bike racing and ski racing, for us at least, was through sponsorship. And feeling like I did have to perform. And when I met people who were sponsoring our team, having to like sell my performance to them. And who I was as a person and who I was as a value to them was really based on my performance. And I would say in supporting that, like coaches and parents can really focus in on the positive qualities of sponsorship, talking to people in important and business-like conversations, being professional, those sorts of aspects, and really making sure that youth athletes especially aren't feeling undue pressure to perform in this face of, external validation through social media, through sponsorship. Yeah. What are your thoughts? You did a lot of this sponsorship work through Bike
just
Club.
backing out of sponsorship, I think there's an opportunity and there's a solution.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about emotional literacy, I love the term. It's great. It's not one we use tonight, but thank you for sharing that. And I think also there is media literacy, right? So athletes need media literacy training, and part of media literacy training, and it's available, like you can search for it, or social media literacy training, is the understanding of how you can get enmeshed in your online identity and how to protect against that. Now, what is the opportunity that social media provides that isn't always there, it wasn't there before social media? There's actually also the opportunity to present yourself as a broader person than an athlete. So if you like camping in the summer and you're a winter sport athlete and you post about your camping, you have a camping identity. If there are people who follow you because you like camping. If you also like to cook and you post about cooking. So the idea of identity display and then response reinforces multiple identities, which protects you when you have that injury and you can't post about your results. So there's an opportunity with social media and there's a high risk. And again, the sumo parent or the sumo coach has to be in there making sure that the wanting the likes and following the clicks is not what it's all about. It has to be about some authenticity in the sharing of who you want to be. Because if you're sharing performative aspects, even in the places you're not doing your identity, you're still in a performative mode versus authenticity. So that is a tricky space. And I know it's terrible, as I hated social media as a parent. Yeah, I wish we could abolish social media up to a certain age. It would make all our lives easier. Yeah.
We're going to take one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. It's excellent. Lots of really great information. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to supporting athletes in sports that are subjectively judged.
Don't have that experience. Personally. So I'm not sure I'm an expert on that, but from a theory point of view, it would strike me as even a bigger opportunity to celebrate your performance, as without the judgment, right?
Huge process focus.
Huge process focus, right? Over product. Like, did you achieve the things you had hoped to achieve in this? Because you have to detach yourself from the judgment of these people, which is somewhat arbitrary and could even be based on mood or politics. And so So the transparent discussion with the athlete about celebrating the process and why you perform is not for the score, but because you actually enjoy the theater and the opportunity and the camaraderie and the peers you do it with. And I do think sometimes kids would say, I don't enjoy it. And then maybe that's the sumo parent moment when you're like, okay, let's move through this stage. Let's find you a new identity. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, folks. Yeah, Quinn's mom couldn't be here tonight, so that's her, and that's my sailing partner who we lost 2 years ago. Oh, we got to do that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we can
thanks.
see them all, but
yeah, they're really good looking slides right here. Yeah, we wanted her to make sure she's half the battle.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just a couple of.
Should we stay here? Or
you stay. It's just a couple of final thoughts before we run. I'm David Cronin. I have the honor of being on the board of directors of the Whistler Institute. And I just have a couple of thoughts to close tonight's program. First, let me thank Brian and Quinn, a dynamic duo if we ever had one. So thank you guys so much. Great job tonight. Our goal at the Institute is to deliver education, learning, and discussion around topics that affect our community. And I think hearing Brian and Quinn tonight, that checked all the boxes, because this is a community that's about lots of things, but it's about sport and it's about families. It often gets forgotten, but we are about families. We have people that live here and work here and bring up their kids here, and they come for the sport, and it's the meshing of those two is really important. So I think, when you think about what we can do for this community to have discussions like this, I think it's fabulous. I mean, I have a list of things I got to go home and apologize to my kids now for years of making mistakes. But really terrific, and thank you. I've said this before, that when you look at the Whistler community, and you think about what makes us special, the things that come to mind: sports and recreation, we've touched on that; health and wellness, we've touched on that; food and wine, the arts. We have some great things going on in Whistler. Our goal, our objective at the Institute is to elevate and bring education and learning on that same footing. So how can we say, when you think of Whistler, you think of sports, you think of the arts, you think health and wellness, but you think of the community here and the learning and the education that goes on in that community, and that's our goal. And I think tonight you've really helped us reach that goal, so thank you for that. There is a little catch, of course, to that, and there's always a catch. To do that takes commitment and resources and investment, and we are a nonprofit organization, and we rely on the generosity of the community, of our partners and our sponsors. So as you all go home and you think about the value that you've gotten tonight or in other of our programs or in the future programs, and if you can include us in your giving plans down the road, we certainly appreciate that. And we have a monthly donor program coming around, and that's an easy way to give a couple dollars each month. It's a few coffees here and there per month, and that really helps us. I'd like to just also thank our volunteers tonight, and Mandy and her team that put this all together, and Frank and others downstairs that helped us. So thank you for making the event possible. Thanks again to our funders and our sponsors, the McLean-McCaug Foundation, Bob and Sue Adams, the Lightburn Family Fund, and Steve Bailey in particular, the RMOW, and the Whistler Blackcomb Epic Promise. All these folks and organizations, believe in what we're doing, and we appreciate what they do. Lastly, thanks to all of you for coming out and making time in busy schedules. On that note, we do have 2 more events. Are they up here? Yep, there we go. The first on the left there, coming up next month, Democracy and Science. With what's going on in the world right now, and both both of these are under attack, I would think we can safely say, and to be able to talk about them, I think is really important and very timely. So I hope you'll come and join us for that in a month from tonight, in fact. And then we'll finish up our series in April talking about glaciers and watersheds and what we can do here in Whistler and in the Sea to Sky Corridor to understand those, but also to engage in those discussions. Lastly, we will be sending out a survey along with the recording, right? The access to the recording and to the materials that Brian and Quinn shared. So we'll send that out in the next day or so. Please take some time, and your feedback's really important, so fill out that survey. It just takes 2 minutes, and if you do fill it out, you'll be entered to win what is a really nice prize, which is a day pass from our fine friends at the Scandinav Spa. So with all this going on and stress, why not a day at the spa? So fill out the survey and get a chance to win that day, and we thank the Scandinav Spa for that. I think that's it for me. Again, thanks to Brian and Quinn. Terrific evening, just great presentation. And they'll be around for a minute. We'll see you all later, and thanks again. Get home safe.